Give it a second. Okay, we are live on YouTube and on Zoom for our first Tech Talks of the quarter. And we are super excited to have our new instructional designer, Dr. Cassie Dame Griff, is going to run the show for us today. We wanted to talk about the assign to function in Canvas. Parts of that tool are not new. It's been around for a long time. But over the summer, they had an update, and it does some cool stuff that you may not be aware of. And Cassie, you're going to talk about using it specifically for accommodations and accessibility.
Yep, that's the plan.
So whenever you're ready, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for bearing with me as I give not just my first Tech Talk, but apparently the first Tech Talk of the quarter.
Yeah, no pressure.
Whoops.
It's all good.
That wasn't planned. But I'm going to give you a little bit more about me for those of you who haven't encountered me.
Are you sharing your screen?
I'm not sharing my screen just yet.
Okay. Sorry, no, it's all good.
Thanks. So like Caleb said, I am the newest instructional designer here at eLearning. I taught for about 10 years before I moved into instructional design. And one of my biggest, one of the most important things to me as an instructor was figuring out how to make my courses and the LMS and my syllabus more accessible to students in a wide variety of ways. Sometimes I hit up against walls where, the LMS didn't have tools. And so I was doing a lot of things ad hoc, which I know a lot of instructors do, where you're keeping things in your email and you've got Post-its and that sort of thing. So as an instructional designer, getting to know Canvas a little bit more intimately, and understanding how some of these things are responding to our needs as instructors, responding to our needs in higher ed, and saying there are ways that the LMS can hold these things for us. And this is an example of that. So the assign to function is an example of what we now see Instructure responding to folks saying, we need something that handles this question of differentiating student access in the learning management system, not in our email, not on the Post-its on the walls that look like a conspiracy board. We want something in the LMS.
Yes.
So I'm going to start with my goals for today, and then I'll share my screen so you can kind of see what I'm working through. So my big goals for today, first, we're going to introduce the assign to function in Canvas. I'll talk a little bit more about where it comes from, what it does. We're going to talk about the types of accommodations that we could use assign to for. It is October, it's Disability Awareness Month.
Yeah.
So we are keeping in with that theme. So we're going to talk a little bit about student accommodations. We're going to talk about use cases for assign to. So when's the best time to use assign to? We're going to specifically talk about individual components in Canvas, full modules in Canvas, and assignments, classic quizzes, and new quizzes. We won't go too far into new quizzes though, I promise. And then we'll end with a Q&A and questions and see what happens.
Great.
So let's get started. Not sharing my screen yet, I promise.
Okay.
Okay, so assign to. As Caleb mentioned, assign to existed, right? But it's an updated feature. So over the summer, it kind of grew a little bit. And it gives us the option in Canvas to differentiate access to learning objects, tasks, and due dates, depending on student needs. We're going to be focusing on using assign to for students, like I said, with accommodations. It already existed for assignments and quizzes. So if you've seen it before, that's where you saw it in assignments and quizzes, but it didn't exist for pages and modules before this summer. And that's really where some of the proverbial magic can happen with assign to. So that's the introduction. In terms of student assignments, some of the things that folks are using it for, that I've used it for, that folks on the various Instructure threads are talking about using assign to for, are things like due date modifications. So if you want to assign a different due date for a student, so thinking about students who have extensions as part of their accommodations, or a circumstance that's arisen, like a car accident, a loss of housing, a loss of internet access. These are not technically disability accommodations, but they are accommodations that we can be responsive to as instructors. But they can also be accommodations that are specifically ones that come to us from DAS. So students with chronic illnesses where they're not sure when something might happen and they just need a quick response to a change, right? We need to be able to change that due date. Other things we can do are giving students additional resources. So for example, if you have a student who might need something in plain language or plain English, and you have a reading that is maybe really jargon heavy, and you want to give them something that they're going to have less of a reading barrier to. Maybe they're learning English, maybe they have a traumatic brain injury, maybe anything, right? It's how do we respond to that by putting in something extra for them? So you can think of it as an additional thing that can be given to a student. Maybe you give them extra practice work on something too. So that's additional resources, alternative resources as well. So if you have, as many of us have kind of been dealing with, students who need lecture videos, right? Part of their accommodation is that you're giving them access to your lecture recordings. And you don't necessarily want to give that to everybody. You don't have to, right? We can use Assign to give alternative versions. I just had an instructor also do a digital version of a paper resource where, you know, they had a paper resource that somebody was using, a paper exam, and the student needed it for mobility issues, right, on to be digitized. And we can just put that in Assign to. So alternative resources. But as you teach, I'm sure that you're gonna come up with a lot more use cases. The big goal to remember when you're thinking about a student accommodations and the Assign to button or tool, as I think of it, it's to make responding to student accessibility accommodations easier, more intuitive, but right there in the LMS, right? That's the big goal. I know I mentioned it before. We, as you know, as instructors, you shouldn't have to rely on your email or kind of like a conversation. You should be able to use the LMS. And so this is the way that we can do that. Any questions or thoughts or even examples of student accommodations that you might want to see this tool used for, or maybe a student accommodation that I can keep in the back of my mind as I'm talking through?
Cassie, this is Heidi. Did you mention larger font?
Larger font, I didn't, but absolutely. No, that's a great one. So if you have a larger font version of something that you want a particular student to have access to, you know, sure, we could give it to every student, but maybe this one particular student wants it or needs it, like absolutely Assign to.
And like part of this conversation about tools like Assign to, it's kind of the difference between accommodations and universal design, right? There are situations where if you have something that is a more accessible version, you should probably just make it available to all students all the time. That should be your default universal design for learning version of something. But there are other things, alternative formats, large print, simple language, where it's not intended for universal access for all students. So I think that's just part of the conversation as we're looking at individual examples. And when does it make sense to just make this the default, and when does it make sense to make this individualized?
One of the ways that we've been talking about this a lot over here in e-learning is the difference between making something sort of thinking about something universally versus thinking about specificity of need, right? So when a student very specifically needs something and you need to respond to that, it might not be useful for every student. It might even in some cases be kind of a hindrance to other students. An example that actually kind of came up as I was working on this project is the idea of visual clutter. So if you put a lot of different versions of something, the students are like, which one?
Right.
And if you look at a Canvas page, which we can do because I have those, now's the time to share the screen.
Okay.
So we're gonna share screen options. No, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, I know how to use this. I totally do this job every day.
Share.
Share.
It just looks weird because you
It
have it
just
all
looks all
shrunk
scrunchy.
down. Okay, there we go.
We're gonna share my sandbox. So if you're looking at, so this is just my sandbox in here, but if you're looking at a module and you put a bunch of things in there, visual clutter. So for me as somebody with ADHD, I'm gonna look at every single thing on that thing, and that's an accessibility issue,
Yeah,
right? So you've made an accessibility issue,
it looks like it all has
Right.
equal importance, and equal weight, and
Right.
that may not be the case.
and that may not be the case. So let's dig in, shall we? All right, so as I promised, I have some use cases here. And this, like I said, is just my sandbox, or my litter box, if you prefer. You are looking at the puns that are in my sandbox here. I am a cat person. I have many of them. You can ask me later and I will tell you at great length. So the first use case that I want to share with you all is individual components or individual pages. So this little module here is all about individual components of something. With each of these components, without changing any of the settings in the module, you can use assign to. You can simply adjust or add specific components. Pages, you can see I use pages 3 different ways in here. They're a really good way to do this because you can create things like a page of additional resources. And this would just go to a particular student. You can do that with any of these components here. So I'll show you how, because that's why you're here. So when you're going into assign to, it's living in the buttons. And some folks will call this a hamburger menu, but not really. It's not, because it's not 3 lines. I call it the vertical dots of doom because you never think to look at them, but they're there. And they have a little friend here called assign to, and this is where it all happens. If you click in assign to, sorry, I'm gonna move this over, you will see this flyout menu. You'll see that right now it is assigned to everyone. It doesn't have any availability, but if it were an assignment, it might. If you want to change your assign to, so you're specifically responding to this for this student. So let's say I only want one student to look at famous cats and those who worship them. Nick Taylor is going to be that student, in fact.
So that pops out your whole class.
That pops out your whole class roster, and it will give you individual students. You can do multiple students. You can give them the same assigned to, so maybe I would give him a different availability. Maybe I will give it to him on the 9th, but I gave it to my whole class on the 10th because he needs extra time. Right? And I wanted to give him that extra time to read this. So I could give it to all of my students who have an accommodation, assuming they have the same accommodation. If they don't, you just keep adding. And that's what I really like about assign to. Yes, this can get a little bulky, but if I have another student test, for example, who needs it even sooner, I can give it to them. Right? So that add button is really important here. And then you would just save it. And now students have differential access to it. Another way that you can do this, I'll use a different page. This is just for one student. Student test gets this page of additional resources. No one else in the course gets it. Gonna click assign to, and I'm only going to assign it to student test.
Because by default, it's assigned to everyone. So you go in there and X out.
Get rid of everybody. And you're only gonna give it to the particular student who needs it. You may be asking yourself, okay, so you did this, can all my students see that there's a page of additional resources specifically named for this student? That would be a FERPA issue, right? If they could see this. So we're gonna check view as student really quickly. Go into student view. Other students can't see it. And that's important. That was one of the things where the first time I used this, I was like, oh boy, did I just commit like an ultimate sin of FERPA and put something about my student separately from the other students? No, I did not. So it does that. And so if student test were the student I was looking at, they would be able to see everything. So that's a nice little feature. It's really good to know if you're nervous. And if you're nervous for that at any point and you want to make sure that things are working right, go ahead and go into student view. It'll keep you where you need to be. So this is the individual component object. Really, it's just pick things and, I want to go ahead and assign it to this one student. I want to give them the due date. I get rid of everyone. This is just for Nick.
Oh,
Yay. And make sure you save it. So any questions on the individual components?
I have
Tool version.
So the student that you assigned, the additional resource, they're only going to be able to tell by looking in their Canvas shell. I mean, unless you've told them that they have that additional resource.
Yeah, so they're going to be able to see it in their Canvas module.
it'll
So
be visible to them, not to
it'll
the
be
students.
just visible to them, not to the other students. So best practice would be to let them know, hey, you've got something that in here that's just for you.
But they won't get like a notification or any automated
Yeah.
thing about it, will they?
Well,
Well-
it depends. If they have notification settings set up in a certain way, like they'll get a notification about a new assignment
Yeah,
or a new
that's
item
true.
on their to-do list.
That's true.
And if it's a page and you had a due date on it, for example,
That's a good point.
it will be put on their calendar.
That's a great point.
But in general, it won't, unless there's a particular set of, they've done it this way and we've got their,
So we shouldn't make assumptions on that because each student has their own notification settings that they have control of.
absolutely.
And they may or may not have it turned on that way.
So it's best practice to let them know. Just say, hey, I know that you got, that you needed this thing is here for you, please look in module 1. Another thing that, isn't directly in the purview of using the tool, this is when communication with students is really gonna be important to letting them know, like, I'm aware of your accommodations and I'm being responsive to them. Because oftentimes students will expect that nobody's responding to them, right? Or that it isn't happening. But for you to be able to say, actually, yes, and to let them know, the students are oftentimes a little bit of an anxious bunch, let them know that this thing that is for you is only for you, and so don't worry that other students can see it. In case they are concerned that other students are seeing things that are specifically meant for them, just let them know, nope, don't worry about that, that's not the issue. Yeah, Jess.
So if, like you were saying, when the pages get or when things get too cluttered, that's not helpful. So I'm just wondering, like, say as an example, one of the pages you made was just the same as what you had for other students, but larger font. That was like something someone brought up. So would it be advantageous then to assign to like the big font to just that student, but then the other one exclude that student, just so that way they're not seeing double things and then it's like, okay,
That's a good question.
That's a really good question. I thought about that, and that I think is kind of one of the limitations of assign to, because you can't do, as far as like, well, yeah, you can do that. Hold on, let me check. Let me do a quick check of this. Because there's this everyone else button, and I'm wondering if that's the button. So let's see.
I think everyone else is only available
Only
if you
available.
already have an assigned to for an individual student or a subset of students.
Yeah.
I mean, what you could do you mind trying something really quick?
Let's go.
Keep everyone in that item.
Mhm.
And then click add and just add me, for example. I believe that will automatically select everyone else up there.
Yep, it does.
I'm wondering
Changes
if you
it.
then save it, then delete it, if it'll keep the everyone else.
Oh, we're hacking.
I don't know, I'm
Try it.
just
Let's
curious,
give it a try.
because the alternative, right, is to go through and
So if we
maybe just
get
delete
rid
it.
of that.
No.
Oh.
there's
No.
everyone.
dang.
Yeah.
Canvas is too smart.
So you'd have to go and click on every.
Everyone but the ones,
But-
that sounds like a mess to me, but
Right.
also like. Philosophically, for accessibility reasons. You probably don't want to exclude content for the student that has the accommodation, you should only be doing it additively, I think.
I mean, my thought was
I know.
only if it was identical, but like
Yeah.
larger font, cause
Yeah.
then
I see what you're saying.
Cause I would be worried that the student would open both and then think they had to read both, so I was trying to clean it up
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I totally get, you don't wanna remove, like, if they're different things,
Yes.
right? But if they're the same thing but different font,
Mhm.
as an example.
Well, and depending on the specific circumstance. There's also things that individual students can do in their account settings to change their default font size on Canvas content to be larger. But that assumes that your course content is set up as an HTML page and not like a Word document or something where it wouldn't be affected by those. As is often the case with accessibility stuff, it's very context specific, very individualized. So I don't know, like there's one universal right answer to that.
There's one thing that can kind of help with that, which is actually gonna take us to our next use case, is assigning full modules to specific students. So, you know, if you have a student who needs, all of the texts in the course to be of a larger size, and they, for some reason, maybe don't want them peppered in the individual modules. Some students are like that, they just like, I want readings, and that's fine. Or maybe they need them all in one place so that they can print them out. Or so that, you know, they have a different kind of access to them. You can assign whole modules to folks. So you can assign an entire module. It can, like I said, it could function as a repository for all the things that are unique to that student. Which is nice for some students because they feel like, okay, this is my special module, it has what I need in it. I think it's a tool that, you know, use at your discretion. And it works the same way as the individuals, but rather any permissions in terms of assigned to that you put on the module will then go into every single thing in the module. So that's important. Think of it as the parent now, and it's giving the permissions. So same thing, right? You click on your dots of doom, that's what we call them now. You click on your dots of doom and you hit assign to, there's settings here too. We won't get into that. You'll hit assign to, you'll assign it to student tests. I'll go ahead and do that again and I'll assign it to Nick. Save it. And now this module belongs to Nick.
And what I like is, at least on the module level, it has an indicator showing that there is an assigned to setting on
Right.
that.
You assign to.
Which it doesn't do on individual items, which is a little
A
annoying.
little bit irritating.
That might be something that Canvas will improve
Right.
on over
We'll
time.
give them some time.
Yeah.
Which is why I like to name these things, like this is for.
So you can keep track of what you know, but yeah.
But like I said, like same function, this module now will not show up. It's gone, right? For anybody who's not Nick. So we're gonna leave student view again. Let's talk about why we would do this. So like I said, this is for anything where you want your students to have like a repository of things. It can also be for those of us who, or for those of you who are recording your lectures and you don't want every student to watch your lectures because, you know, they are meant to be in class. You know, and this is again, we can debate universal design versus individual need, but let's say that you have a need to only give the recordings to one student. You cannot, fun fact, you cannot in a module, this is a weird thing, you can't use the external tool of Panopto in a module and individually assign that particular Panopto video.
So that assign to function is not available
Or
if it's
panel.
just a video.
Yeah. It
Okay.
is not, it is available if the whole module is assigned to.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
So you could put all your video, individual Panopto videos in the module
Yeah.
and then assign to the
Yeah.
module.
Assigned to.
Okay.
So like this right here, you'll see, I cannot.
Gotcha. Because it's linking to something, it's not a
Yeah.
Canvas item.
And
Gotcha.
this is a problem,
Yeah.
right? If you want your students to have access to your videos. So making the whole module do that. Pro tip, you can also put all of your Canvas or all of your Panopto recordings on a page, which I did up here, page of lecture videos for students.
And then now that it's a page, you can
You can.
assign to.
But that's just like a quick like, oh, what a fun thing that doesn't work the way I want it to. And so this is why a module might be useful in this case.
Okay.
So that's the full module. That's a good way to use it for students. And then when we talk about, last but not least, assignments and quizzes. So this is where you can, as you always have been able to, make assignments, classic quizzes, and new quizzes function differently with the assigned to. So with an assignment, you can do different due dates. So everyone else gets this October 17th, but Nick has an extra day here. So different due dates you can give, I gave him an extension essentially.
Thank you.
Also pro tip, this is great for extensions.
Yes.
If you give extensions and a student says, I need an extension, you say, absolutely. You're gonna forget unless you go in, maybe you do it this way. I would often forget, grade the student, give them, penalize them for not turning it in on time, get the email. Do you remember when we talked about that after class? Absolutely, I do not. But by putting it in Canvas, I have said, I agree, and I did it. So you can do it that way. With classic quizzes, it's the same thing, different due dates, so extensions, the assigned to tab. Student test got an extra day there. Now, it gets a little bit weird in new quizzes. Like I said, I'm not gonna do a deep dive into new quizzes. It has a slightly different workflow, so it has assigned to. So it has that same workflow on the side here, but if you're building out in a new quiz, it will give you assigned access, which is just a different way of saying it, but it's the same thing. It just looks a little different when you're not in the dots of doom. But
Because you can always still go into click on the assignment or the quiz
Yeah.
and edit it,
you can always.
and you have the assigned to boxes there, which is the way that traditionally that's the workflow that we've always had.
Right.
Now we have that pop out menu.
So
I
you
got
go
you,
into
different
it.
word there.
So assigned to, it just says it a little differently. It really just replicates that flyout and puts it here.
Mhm.
But it startled me the first time. And I was like, oh my God, why are you here? So I figured if it startled me, it might startle you.
Okay.
So really, this is kind of my, not a deep dive, more of a, let's play around in it a little bit. I think that if we're looking for a wrap up or a takeaway, at least on my end from assigned to, is that this is really just a way to keep it in the LMS, right? Make sure that you're not, juggling different conversations. I'm sure that, obviously, like if you have a conversation, you're gonna have to make that extra step. But this way, you know where it lives, you know that it's been, unmute myself. You know that it's been handled in the LMS and it's really easy to make changes as needed. So,
You're just avoiding the ad hoc mess
Right.
of trying to handle your accommodations with individual students in some other format.
Yeah.
There's also like a little bit of a CYA component to that.
Yeah.
Of all the accommodation work that you're doing is recorded within Canvas, within the course. So if there was ever a situation where there was confusion about what happened or disagreement about what happened, you can always point to it here. You don't have to dig through your email and try to find a sent message proving that you did something. It all lives there.
it all lives there. And I think for students too, from a student perspective, knowing that the LMS is, because we say this a lot, that for students with disabilities, LMS's college syllabi, it's often not built for us, right? So being able to say, actually, in this case, you know what, it is built in. And that's great, and that's fine. It can be a helpful sort of discussion to have with students about accessibility more broadly and what it means to build accessible tools and use accessible tools. So that is my joy in this particular tech talk, is that this is a way for students not to have to feel exceptional, right? To feel like, no, this is built in for me and I can use it and my instructor can use it. And it's not an undue burden on anybody, especially the student user, right? We don't want to give them more burden, more intellectual, academic, emotional, social burden of having to navigate this when the LMS can do it for us.
I like that.
Beautiful.
We are past the 1:30 mark, but
Sorry.
no, that's okay. We're not in a hurry to go anywhere. So if anybody has any questions, concerns, they want to think through this, we certainly have time to do that. I can also turn off the recording in just a minute in case anybody has questions that they don't want to have on YouTube. We'll do that right now. Before I go, just say thank you, Cassie, for a great session. And we will be back next week with Nick. You're going to be leading a tech talk on another cool Canvas feature, the details tag, which we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay.
It'll be fun.
I'm gonna stop recording, or I'm gonna stop broadcasting.
Bye, guys.